Hello! In this video, I'd like to show you how to make something called paper smashe, which is a paper clay. Many students expressed their disappointment that they didn't have a chance to work with clay this year, so this is an alternative that you can do at home. I'll show you some objects that I made with the paper clay, and you'll see that you can do a whole bunch of different things. If you wanted to make a functional object like a bowl, it's very hard. Show close, you can see it's made of paper. Sculptures work. You can have smaller freestanding sculptures. Anything larger needs an armature, so I've made this around a toilet paper tube. I have some smaller food-based sculptures here. And this is also a really great alternative for jewelry making. Here I just made a flat piece, put a hole in it. It could be a pendant. The paper clay can be painted or drawn on or colored. And I have different examples of the way it looks when it's colored, so you can sort of plan ahead what you might like to do. This was colored with crayon. This one was colored with regular watercolor markers. You can also use Sharpies, oil pastels, watercolor paints, and colored pencils. So hopefully you can make some paper clay and have some fun. Let's talk about the supplies you're going to need to create your paper clay. The number one ingredient is paper. I have been using my kids' old worksheets and papers. I have a workbook that I've been tearing apart. The paper that you use should not have a waxy coating on it, so things like magazine paper or covers are not going to break down as easily, so the best paper is regular copy paper. The next thing you'll need is some place to store all of your paper. I've been collecting my paper that I've been carrying up in a bag. If you have a paper shredder at home, that will simplify the process a lot. It's easier to break down shredded paper, but you can still use torn paper. You will need something hard in which to soak your paper scraps or your shreds, and something that you'll be able to grind the paper in. So I'm using a hard plastic food storage container. If you have a big bucket at home, that is a great place to do it in, but not everybody has that, so a smaller container will work fine. The next thing you're going to need is something that you can mash the paper, the torn paper scraps up with. For my small bowl here, I'm using an old block, like a building blocks set. And if you have a large bucket to use, then you're going to need a larger piece of wood, a 2x1, 2x2, something that you can smash the paper scraps with. Also, in order to bind those that paper pulp together once you've mashed it up, you're going to need to have flour. If you have a gluten sensitivity or allergy, you are welcome to try gluten-free flour, or you can simply use glue. The combination, the recipe that I have calls for flour and glue, but you can definitely only use glue if that works best for you. Some other things you might want. You might want some kind of strainer. After you soak the paper in water, you're going to need to drain the water, and you should not ever put paper scraps or pulp down your drain. If you can do this outside, that's best. Right now it's not a very nice day out, so I'm going to do it inside. So spreading a towel, having something underneath it for the water that might splash out is a great idea too. Once you have your paper, you're going to need, if you don't have a shredder, you're going to need to tear the paper up. When you're tearing paper, paper has a grain to it, so you're going to want to tear it with the grain. And if you tear it with the grain, it will tear pretty regularly in strips. If you tear against the grain, it's going to tear in all kinds of directions. So I highly recommend figuring out the grain and just going to tear it up. And you want this to be in fairly small pieces. It will break down faster the smaller the pieces, which is why a paper shredder helps in this process. So once you have torn it, you're simply going to put it in water and soak it. I recommend soaking it for quite a while, at least overnight would be great. If you're in a hurry, it could be done in a couple of hours. You just have to work a little harder at smashing it up. One more thing. If you have an old blender that you no longer need for food, or you have an immersion blender, that will really speed up the grinding process. But I don't have those at home, so I'm going to show you how to do it with. So here is the torn paper pieces that I have been soaking in water. I push them aside and I drain the water. Remember to drain it in a sink that has a strainer, or to use something that will help catch the scraps of paper. Now, as you can see, it's very soft. Mine's actually been soaking for days. The softer it is, the easier it is to mash apart. Your next step is to create paper pulp. So I'm going to take the block I have and I'm going to grind up the paper scraps. This can take some time. If it is too dry, like I feel like mine is too dry right now, it's in big chunks, so I'm going to need to add a little water to this. But this is basically what you do. You keep smooshing it and smooshing it until you can really see that it's been ground up. So I will come back once I have my pulp ground. All right, I'm back and I've been grinding up the paper to get it into more. And of course, if you want to have a larger batch of Smashe, then you will need to have a larger bucket and a larger smashing tool. So this is a really good method of making a larger amount. So you can see it's really broken down now. And my next step is going to be to add the binding agent, which is the flour and or the glue. For this amount, which is about a cup of pulp, I'm going to add 1/8 of a cup of flour and a couple of squeezes of Elmer's glue. So I'll sprinkle this in, and then I'll give it a few squirts. And I will continue this process of mushing it together. Exactly how much flour and glue to use is something you're going to have to kind of test and see with the clay to make sure that it's holding together. When you start to work with it, you can always add more. If it's too dry, you'll want to add a little water to it. But it's just a process of getting a good arm workout and really working all that in there. If it is too wet, you can squeeze out some water, but you need to have enough water in there to really help to mush it around. And now it's starting to be moldable and I can shape it. The longer you smash it, the smoother the texture will be of this. So I'm gonna keep going for a little bit more and I'll come back when I have my finished paper clay. So I'm back and now I really have smashed my paper into a nice pulp here. Whatever you were using to smash it with, remember this has the glue and flour on it. And if it's something that is you're going to keep, you're going to want to make sure you wipe off the pulp before you wash it off so that the pulp does not go down the drain. So now that my Smashe is ready to use, a couple of things you should know. It's like clay, but it does not work exactly like clay. It won't hold the detail that real earthen clay is going to, but we can do a lot with it. So if you just want to sculpt it, so if I take this and you can see, right, it has a much smoother texture now. So you can shape it. Now, this is very wet. If it's too wet and you squeeze it, you might be able to get a little bit more water out of it. Then we can shape it. So the limitation on this is because it is so wet, you can't build something very large with it. It also takes quite a long time to dry, so I don't want to build anything that's too thick. Let me just show you how you can sculpt it. So it's just like clay. You don't want to have anything that's too thick. So let's say I want this to be shaped into the head of an animal. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build it on top of my thumb, which will leave me a nice hole here that will help it to dry. And then I can start shaping the shape I want. I want it to have ears. I can pull those out. I can shape a place for the eyes. And voila, you can see how you can shape it. Now, you'll have to experiment with how much you can pull and push and shape this. So if you want it to be longer nose, bigger ears, but that's the basics of shaping it. Now, if you want something that's slightly larger, I'll set that aside. You might want to start with an armature. So here I've taken a toilet paper tube and I've attached a ball of newspaper to it. And I can take my Smashe and I can layer that over the top. I don't want this to be a thick layer, but I do want to have enough Smashe on here that it will be shapeable. So if this was going to be a puppet head or something like that, I can add on parts to it. So I can add a nose. I could add ears. I can add some lips down here, and I would just keep shaping this to create the final version that I want. I don't have a ton of Smashe here, so I'm not going to bother with the back, and in fact I'm going to reuse this for the next thing. So another option is you can shape it on cardboard. So if we layer out the base, a flat base here, this will allow us to sculpt into this. Now, you can create the shape that you like, all right? And you can make three-dimensional more designs in it. Let me pop this up. So I can press into it to create lines and designs, and you can texture it, you can build onto it with any shapes you might want to add that are three-dimensional, and just have fun with it, explore it, see what it does. If you don't like it, you can start over. If there's any Smashe that you are not ready to use, please remember this has flour in it, so it will mold if it's left for too long. I highly recommend you put it in a plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag, and you store it in the refrigerator, and that you try to use it within a couple. Here are a few more suggestions for things you can do. If you want to make a freestanding sculpture, you're probably going to need to find things to support the weight while it dries. So I've made an animal here, but I know that because it's so wet and it's heavier, if I don't support it, I put a marker under the body to support that, and I put a paper towel under here to hold that. That will really help it stick. When I added the parts together, some of them mushed together quite easily, so I know they will stick. If you're worried about making a part and having it stick, you can always throw a little Elmer's glue underneath that part as you stick it on to help. So that's how you can make a freestanding sculpture. And the next thing is using a mold. So I've taken a bowl and I've put plastic wrap in it. And now I have my Smashe, and I'm going to press the Smashe into the bowl. And I keep going around and around. I can shape the top. I am out of Smashe at the moment, but you can see how if I keep adding more in, I want to keep it fairly thin. I really want to spread it around because, as I said, this is going to take a long time to dry. So that is how you can use a bowl as a mold.